It's
All right.
very soon. Yeah. So welcome to I talk too much today. Welcome to today's event. Today we have Lee here. He is program manager for the Microsoft Power Platform, and he will give us a workshop in this topic. And I think it makes sense to give you the stage and you present yourself.
Sure. Hello, everybody. This is Lee Zuckett. I'm from Microsoft. I'm a project manager, and I work on the PowerCat team. That's customer advisory team. I'm not going to be showing any video of myself. It's very early here. I live in the Seattle area, just outside. So I don't know if everyone knows where Microsoft is. Microsoft, the headquarters, is just outside Seattle, Washington, and it's 7 a.m. my time. So I just a little more than fell out of bed. So I'm not going to be showing any videos of myself here. I do have a presentation though that I'm going to walk through. It's going to start off a little slow and then hopefully build up, and then we're going to jump over to a couple demos. Or actually, it's not really even so much demos as discussion points where I'll show off the Power App side of things. So I'm not going to do your normal, hey, let's go in and attach a SharePoint or attach to a SQL database. I'm going to kind of go in and just show off some, ideally, some things to keep in mind, because you've probably seen all those connection points before, how to attach a SharePoint list, how to attach a SQL, CDS, or sorry, Dataverse is what's called now. Or you can jump in and see YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff along those lines. So I'm hoping to look to do something a little different. Real quick, though, the customer advisory team, that the program I'm on, what basically we do, real quick, and I'm not here to market myself, but just to explain what my background is we help our customers who are buying into the Power Platform. So if you have a big enough customer who comes in and wants to leverage the Power Platform at a specific level, then we kind of kick in as a sort of a mini consulting company, if you will, just to help the customer and maybe their partner. So if they have an SI that works with them, to help get them up and running, going along for a few months, and then we kind of back off and let them run with things. Before I go any further, can everybody see my screen? You should see a blue screen that says Power Platform Workshop.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, good. Alrighty. And then my overall background, I started, if anybody knows of a language called FoxPro. I started off in FoxPro right out of college, which was the mid-90s, sadly, and moved into VB and C# and .NET, of course, and the web development versus WinForms, all that kind of good stuff. Did a lot of work in call centers, trying to help them call centers update and revamp their own system. There was a particular add-on to Dynamics 365 called USD, Unified Service Desk. I did a lot of work in that. If you're familiar with it at all, it's an older version, similar along the lines of what we're now calling RPA, Robotic Process Automation, where you basically screen scrape applications that are so old they don't have any other type of interface. They don't have a web service or REST API or anything along those lines behind them. So you're literally scraping off the surface. And yes, people still do that. We thought that was going to be a dead process or dead solution 15 years ago, and it's around still today. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, let's jump into what the Power Platform is. I'm going to spend a few slides kind of going through this. It might seem a little markety, but so I'll roll through them fairly quickly. Feel free to ask any questions. I've got a few monitors going up here, so I should be able to see the chat window if you want to ask a question there. But feel free to just unmute and jump in along the way. So the Microsoft Power Platform is this low-code. It's really supposed to be a low-code, no-code. It tends to be more low-code platform that spans, and I'm going to read this off. I'll try not to read my slides, but in this case, I'm going to. Spans that Office 365, Azure, Dynamics, and standalone applications. Those standalone being a lot of the ones I just referenced, those older applications that may or may not be service-enabled. The one I personally focus on most of the time is the Power Apps. So it's your Power Apps application. So it's going to be sort of a web-based application that allows you to enter data and get data out. Pretty straightforward from that perspective. Obviously, the devil's always in the details, so things can get complicated. But from the idea of it, it's pretty straightforward type of scenario by itself. Power Automate is basically our workflow engine, our workflow automation. These are the type of workflows you go in, you want to grab some data from some back end, probably asynchronously, and get it done. Or you're in your Power App and you want to send off an email, you're going to call Power Automate to go off and send all those emails for you. So that does that automation in the background. Power Virtual Agents is an interesting one. That's that chat bot. So that's where you can have people come into your website or your portal and ask questions. You've probably seen this before, where you go into some website and it says, "Hey, how can I help you?" And most of the time, I don't know about you, but most of the time I ended up ignoring it. But once in a while, it does help to just ask a quick question, get something answered fairly quickly. The idea of the Power Virtual Agent is that the keyword being virtual here, that you can have these flows, to abuse the phrase flow here, you can have these flows that based on the user's questions, it itself can go out leveraging Power Automate and get additional data and bring an answer together for the user. And then, of course, if the questions become too complicated, you can always shift over to a live agent normally. So those first three. Then the fourth one, and I know this is the first one on the screen, but I'm going to come around to it because it's my least, the one I least ever touch, is the Power BI. So that's your business information system. It's your reporting engine is what it basically is. So again, you have your data entry and input, your Power Apps, your automation system, that's your Power Automate, your Power BI is your reporting tool, and then Power Virtual Agents on the side helps with any chat and automated self-service is what it boils down to.
Maybe I'll step in for a moment. Is it okay for you or for everyone here if we record the rest of the session?
Absolutely. Go ahead, yeah.
Thanks.
I won't repeat all that, but I think the screen, I think most people probably know this part. So once you get that started all.
I think I started. So yeah, now there's the...
Okay, I see it. Yep. All right, real quick, just for the recording, my name is Zuckett, and I'm here to discuss PowerApps specifically and Power Platform in general. And I've kind of just given an overview of the four main pieces of it, sort of in the middle of that discussion. Real quick at the bottom here of the slide, you have your common data service. This is your basic database that underlies the bulk of these operations. And it's no longer, and I apologize for not updating the slide, it's no longer called CDS, it's Dataverse. We've gone through a few name changes over the last year, if anyone has been paying attention. But Dataverse is now the proper, quote-unquote, official marketing name for what was the common data service. You have your AI builder. That's your underlying artificial intelligence building engine that kind of is leveraged pretty heavily, mainly through Power Virtual Agents, that allows the system to try to guess what the user is asking or what the user is trying to do. That's pretty interesting. It's an area I have not played with as much as I'd like to, but it is pretty fascinating whenever I get to see demos of how it can be leveraged. So if anyone has questions, I can probably answer, but it would have to be extremely high level. The last bit here on this slide is the data connectors. This is the main way that the Power Apps, or at least Canvas apps, and we'll get into the difference between Canvas versus MDA apps in a few moments, but this is the main way that the Power App Canvas scenario connects to other data systems, whether it's Azure SQL, whether it's Salesforce, whether it's whatever it happens to be, Google Mail, et cetera, across the board, internal to Microsoft and external third-party products as well. And you are able to create your own custom connectors. For example, if you have your own proprietary internal in-house system that you need to connect to, excuse me, I have a bit of a frog in my throat. If you have your own proprietary system that has a REST API, then you can create your own data connector to it as well. Of course, you could always create a Power Automate to also get data from a more complicated system if it wasn't REST API based, but that's, we're getting a little nitty gritty there, so I'll just kind of leave that for now. What is this low code, no code scenario? All right, this is a classic marketing slide. I'm just going to kind of let it run through it and talk to it real quick. As you can see, the idea of low code, no code, sorry, I need to take a sip of water here. are really expecting everything to be digitalized. Little to no paperwork anymore. Everything's expected to be up on a screen, whether it's a tablet, whether it's mobile. All of that is something that should be accessible to the up-and-coming workforce. One of the pieces that kept us from being able to completely digitalize everything is the complexity to create an app, whether it's .NET, Java, etc. How do we get a system that's up and that we can create these applications faster and faster? And I don't have a slide, but there's it's a great slide somewhere. It shows how many apps we have roughly today in the grand. I don't know how they know those numbers, but how many apps are out there today? It's in the hundreds of millions, and how many are expected to be built over the next 10 years, and it like quadruples that. Part of it's because of products like the Power Platform that allow us to come in and create these applications much faster than we ever were able to before. Now, that said, I do want to set a stage that these applications, because they tend to be low code, no code, also tend to be a little more straightforward. So they're not going to be as deep and as complex as, say, a classical .NET or Java application where you really had full control of the screen, every little nuance you controlled. So this is more of get in, get something done, get a task done, maybe automate some emails in the background and get out and move on to the next thing. That's not to say you cannot do more complicated scenarios, but it's more designed for this sort of task-based scenario. So I already kind of discussed this, what the differences are between the Power Apps and Power Automate. So I'm not going to go into gory detail again. I just wanted to point out some of these key pieces. Notice that that these connectors that allow you to connect your Power Apps to your back end is down here it says 350 plus. It's actually up to 400 right now. So we have 400 pre-built connectors that you can leverage to connect your Power App application to some back-end system, whatever it happens to be. Same with Power Automate. So think of Power Automate as just the back end or the automatic or invisible version of Power Apps. Power Apps is the one that you have the interface with, you interact with as a person, and Power Automate is the thing that can go off and do stuff, whatever stuff happens to be, in the background for you.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So do we use Power Automate to create functions in the Power Apps, or how can I understand this?
Yes, yeah. So that's exactly what it could be. You could have a form that's up and running. You filled in some data. You've clicked save, and then you want to send some email to somebody. I know I keep harping on the email example because it's an easy one that we all can sort of appreciate. Yeah. You could be filling it all out. Click send email. That email you would then call a Power Automate process, which in turn would go off and fire off the emails, leveraging whatever email system you have, whether it's Exchange, whether it's Gmail. Those are the two big ones, really. But you'd be able to do that. Now, Power Automate is not an area I tend to do much work into or in myself. I dabble in it once in a while when I have to. It's pretty straightforward for the most part, but I don't have any extensive thing. And I wasn't planning on talking about it or demoing any aspects of it this particular round. I know there was some discussion of it, but it's not my strong suit to usually delve into. That said, as far as, say, business functions, if there's a flip to your question. The other part is, hey, I just have a business process. You could also use Azure Functions. If you want to send out, say, I have 3, 4, 5 pieces of data, I need to send it into a function, and have it run some calculations and then give me back a result. You could use Power Automate for that. Depending on the complexity of your calculations, you may want to look into Azure Functions, which is another way you could call out and do that. That's more designed for the more old style. Hey, I'm going to write a bunch of business processes, put them in a spot. That might be more of an Azure function. It really depends on what you're trying to do, and there's a nuance there that probably just comes with experience and what what your personal preferences are, and the complexity of the process itself. The next slide here, hopefully you can see, is Power Virtual Agents again and the Dataverse. So Dataverse is what again was Common Data Services. And it sits under, so data, let me just take a moment. I'm going to kind of skip over the Power Virtual Agents. You can read that. It's very fun to play with. If you have nothing else, go in and grab a trial of Power Virtual Agents and play with it. It's kind of fun to play with. And it is a powerful tool that you can leverage for your portals and stuff to help answer a lot of quick questions from your users. Dataverse, though, I want to explain. You tend to think of it, or I tend to think of it, and this is something I should not do, is just, oh, it's a SQL database. It's SQL behind the scenes, and you slapped an API on top of it. That is a part of it, but there's more to it than that. There's actually 2 or 3 types of databases behind it. There's Cosmos DB, there's obviously Azure SQL, and there may or may not be a file system behind there. Why would they do that? The point is, I have a record. I have an account, which could be maybe your household. So you have the Zuckett household, you have mom and dad and 2 or 3 kids, a classic nuclear family scenario. And then you also want to upload pictures of each of those folks. So your basic data would be in the account. Each person may be a contact that hangs off that account. And then you're going to upload some pictures. Most of the data would just be in Azure SQL because it's pretty straightforward, right? First name, last name, address, phone numbers, email addresses, all that kind of stuff. But the pictures, where do I want to store them? You could store them in SQL. You could store them as encrypted, or not encrypted, sorry, encoded on a file system. What is the best way, most efficient way for that to happen? If you were a pure SQL person, you would just embed it right into one of the SQL records somewhere along the line. Maybe you'd store it on a file share somewhere and then just have the link to it, and then you'd go and grab it. CDS, I think, puts it in Cosmos DB, but don't quote that. But the point is, you don't need to know where it goes. The Dataverse itself is that API says, hey, I'm going to go get Lee Zuckett's record, and it's going to get it from where it's best to get it from. So if it's just my first name, last name, it's probably going to get it from Azure SQL. If it's my picture, it's going to go off to maybe another database that's that has a link to each other, and it's more efficient for, say, file or image management than SQL would be itself. But you don't need to know that. It extrapolates all that for you so that you can just have the best scenario across the board. Of course, with any time you start to generalize a system, sometimes you lose some features, and you will want to fall back on Azure SQL directly, and that's okay when it's appropriate. But just know that the 80-20% rule is that most of the time Dataverse is going to be able to cover your scenario, and those 20% that you need something else, you can always jump off and go to a specific database or data source as required. Okay, the whole point here of the unified Power Platform, and I won't spend too much time here, we'll get to the demos fairly quickly, is focusing on, ACT here. I love this. This one is a slide I just stumbled across the other day, and again, I apologize, that middle piece should be Dataverse. But I was trying to allude to this earlier, where your Power App is where you act. You as the user who's sitting there at your desk or on your mobile phone, you're acting on the data. You're visually seeing it, you're updating it, you're creating records. That moves on to how I'm going to analyze that data. Okay, I've pulled in 1,000 records over the last 6 months. How do the reports? What are the reports telling me about my customers, my users, my students, my employees? How can I react or see to that data? And then finally, you can swing around and automate. Now that I've put in all these records and such, maybe I do want to email them every 3 months and say, hey, checking in on you, making sure that your address is up to date. Sorry. If it's not, can you please, jump to this link and update your data. So I'm going to act on the data, I'm going to add it and update it and create it, I'm going to review it, and then I'm going to automate anything that just needs to be done in the background on a consistent manner. This all comes from that low-code, no-code scenario. So how do I bring this all together with a very, very minimal amounts of having to type in any type of code, lots of drag and drop, lots of minimalistic functions, etc. Empower everyone to be a developer. One of the key points here is trying to bring it up so that, yes, we can still have our professional developers who write the Java and the Visual Studio or .NET applications, but we also want to move a lot of this power to what we refer to as citizen developers, how they can bring these applications to bear for themselves, for their companies, for their universities faster without having to rely on the in-depth knowledge of old-style coding. Even if you are a pro developer, sometimes it's just easier and faster to jump in and create a Power App. And of course, the whole key point is, even if you are working in Power Apps and Power Automate and you need something that's more in-depth, you could reach out to a pro dev friend or whoever, have them write an Azure function that does some complicated material in the background, and then you move ahead and leverage it in a low-code, no-code manner. So it's not that, hey, it's either one or the other. It's a combination of both.
Sorry, I have a small question. Is that
Sure,
all right?
Yeah.
As you explained that Microsoft wants to provide everyone with the ability to code through those no-code app, is it still possible to combine those features together? Let's say I, as a citizen, have an idea to create an app, but at some point it gets too specific to implement it within the self-service implementation, and I want to get a special feature. Is it possible to, through an interface or whatever, to get custom code linked to this application?
Yes. So I did a really bad job in this last slide. So this slide here is trying to explain exactly that.
Okay.
You would come in as a Power App developer or citizen developer, create your app, or create your app. You stumble across an area that you just can't do inside the Power App. There's no existing service to call. You could then reach over either yourself or someone you know who's a pro developer. So over here, pro developer could go into leverage Visual Studio, create an Azure function that would then take in whatever parameters you need and do a bunch of complicated work in the background and then pump out an answer. So that's where this would kick in. So your function would be here. And your Power App would call through the API to your service that was written in .NET.
Oh, great. Thanks a lot.
Go along the line. Yeah, and these two, all three of the, well, at least the PVA, we refer to this as PVA. These three or four could leverage that. The whole point is, in the end, it's going to be a REST API of some sort. Hopefully, everyone know what a REST API is. Basically, an HTML string or HTTP string URL. Basically, you send in your parameters. Something magic happens in the background. Again, that's here, written in whatever language you really want it to be, as long as it's a REST API, and then bam, off you go. You keep moving forward. Yeah. So the whole point is, it's not one, just citizen developers or just pro. We allow you to merge the two. So again, someone comes in, does all this complicated work in the background, then you snap it together. That's kind of what it boils down to. It's like Lego blocks. That's what we're shooting for. So again, here's the other one. How to extend beyond those out-of-the-box components. So with Azure plus Power Apps, obviously, if you haven't picked up, working for Microsoft and all this, and this is the Power Platform, I tend to be biased towards Microsoft, so I'm going to stop pretending and just focus on that. You can see here that this is, you can leverage Azure plus Power Apps to really get anything else that you need that isn't already there for you. And this is going to be fairly common. We really push the idea of low code, no code, but everyone's going to come across their own specialized processes that makes you unique, right? I have several companies that have very unique processes. They're one-of-a-kind companies, very interesting to work for, that there's not going to be an existing system out there because there's only one or two of them in the world. So no one's gone out because it doesn't make sense for a company to build a solution just for one or two people, right? So they're going to have to build these things for themselves. On top of that, once they build these processes in Azure, they build those custom connectors. That's the middle piece. And then lastly, you can scale out without servers, which I don't know if anyone, I don't like this phrase. I don't know where it came across, but this whole serverless scenario, of course, there's a server in the background. Basically, it's how you're packaging it and running it in these server Azure functions and such. But that's sort of that combination. Build what you have, connect to it, and then run it at scale on these, up in Azure. Okay, I'm just going to let this one sit for just a moment, and then we'll jump into some of the nitty-gritty Power Apps. I think I've built upon, discussed this several times already. The one I really haven't mentioned too much is the portals. So portals is an add-on. So when you think of Power App, let me step back. When you think of Power Automate, obviously no one except the developer or the citizen developer really interacts with the Power Automate directly as they build it and test it and then they release it, right? The Power App application itself is usually something that's more for the hardcore main user, I should say, not hardcore, the main user. So what do you do with your other users? So in the case, I think for your scenario, the main user might be an administrator or someone who's working in your school class offices, where the sort of end user might be your everyday students. So the everyday students very likely wouldn't, and this really depends on your processes and your licensing agreements, but generally the student would probably access your system through a portal. So your classic web page that happens to also talk to the same Dataverse scenario as your Power App. Your Power App is going to be focused on the folks in the office who are in the back office, if you will, who happen to have specific tasks that they need to run on a daily basis and have it automated. So it's more specific to an office type scenario, where the portal is more like, hey, I'm going to go in, I'm going to pick my classes and schedule it, and I'm done. But there can be a nuance to why you pick one over the other. But generally, portal is the more open-ended one, and anonymously here. Well, obviously, in your case, if you're going to set your schedule, you're going to have to sign in, but it's more open-ended, where your portal is more your hardcore. I'm sitting here at my desk all day long. I'm going to have these various Power Apps who help me do my daily jobs. Okay, so let's jump into some specific Power App stuff. This is actually, I'm speaking a lot slower than I thought it would, so I'll try to be quickly here. Again, Power Apps is low-code, no-code application platform we're about to jump into in a few moments. It's created with the web in mind, so you can always bring it up in a browser. The iPhone and the Android devices and even Windows machines will have specific Power App apps that you can run them through as well. Sometimes they allow additional features, but 99% of the time, in my experience, everyone just runs it through the browser, except on the phone. But for whatever reason, my experience, most people are still usually running it on just the browser. There's two nuances here. There's MDA, model-driven apps. They're data-driven. So they're more, hey, I have a database already exists. I'm just going to slap a bunch of fields from a couple entities or tables. Sorry, we switched to words there too. You're going to slap some fields onto a table, maybe have a quick relationship or two. Very straightforward. I'm not going to show an example of this one today, but if you've ever seen Dynamics 365, what used to be called CRM, that was your model-driven app. Just drag and drop. It wasn't very pretty, but it got the job done. And it was very responsive by design. Now, responsive here means that the screen itself is responsive. So if I shrink the screen, it's going to mold to the fact that I've shrunk the screen. And not responsive from a business perspective, responsive from a UI perspective. Canvas apps, on the opposite, are more UI-driven. So and in that case, they can connect to basically any type of data source that we have a connector for. And as I said earlier, we have about 400 plus. They can also be responsive, but that's through design. And they're working on that to make it more automatic. But right now, you need to do a little more low code to make it as responsive as, say, the model-driven app. One thing I want to point out, it is written here, model-driven apps right now are only Dataverse database connected. Well, I really slaughtered that. All right. So MDA can only really connect to the Dataverse, or Canvas can connect to just about anything, including Dataverse. One thing here to note, I'm going to show out when I finally flip over and start doing the demo, is Power Apps, unlike a normal application. If anyone's written Java or .NET or any classical web app, one of the key differences, Power Apps runs more like Excel does. So if you ever changed a variable in Excel, everything sort of auto-calculates instantly. And I'm gonna point this out. So if it's not making sense right now, don't worry about it. But normal language, you would change a variable and then have to let everyone know, hey, this variable changed, so go refresh yourself or do something because of it. That kind of event-driven scenario is built right into PowerApps. And the reason I'm pointing this out, maybe I'm making a bigger issue out of it than I should have, is it took me a while to catch on to this myself when I started using PowerApps, because it was, to me, a significant difference. So I just wanted to point that out, and you'll see that in a moment. Oops. The key elements to a Power App are the collections. So collections, and you also hear of tables, they're basically client-side data sets. And you'll see an example of this in a few moments as well. So you can have what looks like a table, very Excel-like, rows and columns filled with data. That data can come from anywhere, SharePoint list, any type of database. You may even just create it on the fly for your own purposes, whatever it happens to be, in the Power App itself. Okay. A gallery is a big primary control, and that's the image you see here. Basically, it's that your classic grid environment, and you can have images in it as well. This is not the best example because it's just pretty straightforward. A screen is which is what we're going to play with most of the time in a few moments, is your classic data entry type control. Sometimes it's referred to a form, and in web development, it's usually referred to as a page. A card is an odd little piece of control. It kind of sits in the middle. It's usually invisible, but it's a Power App construct that helps connect the screen to the data source that you're connected to. I don't really have an example of that specifically this time around, but if you go in and create a demo app real quick, you'll see a bunch of cards. And those cards, again, are a middle layer between the screen and the data connector. And you're going to wonder why it's there. To be honest with you, I'm not positive why they just didn't work that right into the screen myself, into the screen control or screen object, but that's the way it is. Your classic controls, I won't go into detail that's your everyday controls we're all used to: buttons, labels, text boxes, etc. Properties are the attributes of a controller function. So your size, your color, and then function, of course, is a snippet. So a snippet of code. So one thing that we do in Power Apps that's a little different is everything outside of those few properties, everything's kind of considered to be a function. We don't really necessarily refer to events or methods or anything like that. They're just functions. Again, very sort of Excel-like, if you will.
I have a question to that.
Sure. Yep.
So I understand a card as like you have there Sam, and he lives in Costa Rica. So that's a card, or may you explain more with more details what a card is, or isn't it a card? Is the completely list a card, or?
No. So the card usually is a wrapper around a given field that sits on the screen and the data itself. So if you have your first name, last name, your first name would be in a first name card, and then there would be a text box inside the card that actually showed your first name and allowed the data entry.
It's like an Excel field. A field in Excel.
Yeah, see, it's not the field because the text box would be the field. It's a wrapper that does the connection between the text box and the Excel or the database. Uh-huh. The reason we're having trouble here is because it's an extra layer that is unusual. I don't know why it's there. I've even read books where they've stumbled and had confused as to why this existing control here is here, this card control. Right. It's an extra layer that I think was used. It's very once I jump over the demo, I'll try to remind me if I don't point it out, but I'll point it out, and you never see it. It's there that you can interact in design mode, but in runtime mode you never see it, and it will feel like it's extraneous to you.
That's kind of funny, but thank you.
Yeah, I know it's I don't know how much designing people have done, but there's always things that you yourself go back years later and like, why did I do it this way? And it may have made sense at the time for various reasons, but sometimes technology changes and things change. There's two types of components. I'm going to show you one of them. It's the Power App component itself, as opposed to a PCF component, which stands for Power App Component Framework. If anyone's done let's fall back. I'll keep it real straightforward. .NET WinForm development. If you ever did any of that, say there's a text box and a label and a button that you used over and over again. Say your address. You have an address box, right? Street name, street number, name, cities, zip code, state, Providence, whatever it happens to be. You have those 5 or 6 controls that are always packaged together. You could slap a user control and put them all in there for you so that you can have a one-stop shop if you ever had to change something. That's what the Power App component is, the top one here, this first bullet point. Basically, I'm combining a bunch of out-of-the-box controls that I use a lot into one package so that I can use it faster moving forward. PCF, on the other hand, your Power App Component Framework, is how all these controls are built behind the scenes by Microsoft themselves, and you can also create your own. So these are pro code, or pro dev code controls written in HTML, CSS, and TypeScript. And so they're the button itself. They're the text box itself. And if you need to come up with an additional control or combination of controls, you can really get in and do the nitty-gritty work yourself. Right now, this is in preview for Canvas apps, and I myself have only dabbled, have not really dabbled into PCF, creating PCF controls myself. But this will be the way moving forward to how to do more complicated stuff in the background. Ideally, you do a pro dev does that once, and then all the folks up on the front just keep reusing it. And you can see some examples of some of these here. So here's like a music one. This isn't out of the box, but someone created a PCF control to do volume and bass and treble control. So, I'm sorry, I'm going to try to move a little faster here. Debugging. I'm going to show you this real quick, so I'm just going to go gloss through it. There's a couple different ways you can do debugging. It's not your classical walking through line by line like again you might do in Java or .NET. It's going to be more of tracking how the messages go back and forth. So this is definitely a different area, and you'll want to be able to check into. I'm not going to spend any time on it here. Check in on things like the trace function, where you can put in your own traces, so that when you're leveraging the monitor control, which is sort of like a debug control or debug feature, you can sit there and say, oh, I did hit this line, or I didn't, or why didn't I get to this line? Because your trace message never appeared. A few things to keep in mind. I'm going to show you the onStart function. This is basically the main of any of your pro dev apps you've ever done, of Java, C#. It's that first thing that runs before anything else and does all your prep work. All right, so it's called onStart here. Functions I mentioned already are overloaded phrases for methods, events, and properties. Concurrent basically is a call, and you'll see this in a moment, that allows us to do multi-threaded calls. So if I'm going to go out and get a bunch of data from different places, if you did it without concurrent, it would do one line at a time, which could be very slow. Where if I wrap it in concurrent, it allows the system to go out and do multi-threading and pull that all together. So instead of 10 seconds, maybe you can get it down to 4 or 5. There is no reusable function. So if you end up catching yourself having to do a business line of code somewhere, and you're like, oh, I'm going to reuse these 3 lines of code or functions over and over again, then you have to copy and paste it over and over again. It's it can be a real maintenance nightmare. And my understanding is at some point they will add this ability to sort of encapsulate that into a hidden function of your own. But right now, you can't just go off and create a sort of a back-end library. Of course, you could create Azure functions if it's pure business processing. But if it's UI manipulation that happens at the front end, then there's no way to just create that easily. You have to copy and paste it. Names are global across the app, not just the screen. You'll see this in a moment. You'll see a bunch of funky names. So if I slap a control and give it a name like first name, that is now, if I create another form next to it, that first name is already being used. So I'd have to create another first name _1 or first name 1. So it's sort of like the old Visual Basic, if you remember Visual Basic 2 and 3, which I doubt anyone does. But if you did, that's the way. It's like every variable is just global, automatic. There's very little to no privacy. And finally, components like user controls that I already discussed. Licensing, I was going to go into it, but we're kind of a lot later than I expected to. So I'm going to send this deck out, and then you can peruse, and you can always ping me after the fact. Okay. So let me bring up a couple apps here. Okay, I'll give it. Hopefully, everyone can see the screen. Can you? Oops. Can you still see the screen or disappear?
Still there.
Okay, good.
We are seeing
Okay.
the Q&A slide.
Yeah, see only the Q&A
Oh.
slide.
Okay, 1 second. Let me reshare. How do you see my browser?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now
Okay.
browsing.
So what you see here initially, let me switch this. Here's your basic PowerApps main screen. If I go to home, this is kind of where if you signed in, this is where you jump to, and you can start creating your apps. Again, I've kind of cut the cord. I went right to solution. So what's a solution? And this is my solution here, A-demo. The solution is just basically a packager for all your apps, your entities, your tables, any workflows, etc. Everything that quote unquote makes your program, your application do what it does. It's your package of stuff. Okay, whatever it happens to be. In this case, I happen to have 2 Canvas apps in here, which I already have open. So I can just jump to them directly. Here's the one that if you had gone in out of the box and said, hey, I'm just going to point to the account table in my Dataverse. Here's kind of what gets created. Now, mine didn't have much data, but you can come in and it'll just create these 3 forms for you. This browse gallery, data screen. So this is your data entry, real simple. And of course, you would have to enhance these as you went along. And finally, your edit screen. So let me go ahead and run that real quick, just to let you see what happens. So it comes right into that main screen. I can click on it. I can go in. I can edit it. Hit save. Saving. And go back. And there, it changed it. Nothing fancy here at all, right? Very straightforward. I can go in. I can refresh it. Close it. You'll see that even as I jump to the screens, they're even in the dev mode. You can see here's the change I already made. Here's your card, by the way, that you're asking about. So you have a card. It just wraps the label and the text box and has some additional properties. So this is your connector that basically connects between the screen, which is the edit screen itself, and then the various pieces within the address part. It's mainly it's a fancy container. I think it's mainly used for data entry. The connectivity between the front end and the back end, whatever the back end happens to be. But it seems like it's just more of just an extrapolation than anything really helpful to me. Why they just didn't hook it right into the text box directly, I don't know. My guess it had something to do with maybe with the wizards when you go out and say I'm going to point to a table, account, contact, whatever, and auto generate. It was easier to have this wrapper that because you could talk to and control it a little easier. That's my guess. I really don't know, so I'll just kind of leave it at that. One thing I want to show here is that this one's wizard created, so there's nothing really special going on here. But I want to point out is that this blue box at the top and bottom are components that I created separately, though. You can see how, in this case, the header is more important. It's just basically this blue box, and I put the accounts. The footer is just this little symbol, and then I slapped it on each of the screens. So I went in, and you can see that. Come on. Oh, it's not letting me do it. Let me grab it. Yeah, you can see that the blue box itself is separate from the buttons. The key idea here is if I want to go in and say your boss comes in and says, "Hey Lee, I need you to change all the headers to be green," and then all my screens would be green. I wouldn't have to have gone to every single one and do that. It seems very obvious, but this is a fairly newer feature. Why this wasn't there right out of the get-go? Because it strikes me as this is nothing. This is not a new idea. But again, it is a new platform, so you have to start from somewhere. And again, I could do that with the footer. I could come in and your boss says, "Hey Lee, I need the footers to all be purple."
So there's a question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Max is asking whether the card is like the grouping function in PowerPoint.
Sort of, yes. Yeah, so it helps you move things around quickly. But in this case, it actually does do more work than just combining, because it does act as a data layer between the text box. In this case, the text box. Here, let me bring up the screen. Sorry, I have a tendency to talk and walk when I'm not actually using my mouse. So it actually is the one that's connected to the data source, to the data field here. So it's very similar to that. Why they just didn't connect the text box directly to the data source? They had this wrapper. I'm sure there's some rationale that I just not appreciating, but yeah. So it's like an advanced version of that. Any questions on this one? Because I know I can go a little longer. I don't know if anyone else can, but basically what I want to show here is this particular app, again, is something you can create from the wizard. If you go back to your home, you can come in here, and all I did was I clicked on Common Data Service, and I went and clicked. Grab this. It says choose a table. I select on accounts and went right forward, and it built me those 3 screens. And then from there, if you're doing a quick data entry and on an existing table, very easy way just to get something up and running. And then of course you can tweak it and modify it all you need to do. But I just want to kind of show that off and really point out the components is what I was really shooting for here. Now again, these are existing components. So if I did a new component, I could go up here and do insert, and I could drag a new text box. New label, see, and then just start doing what I needed to do, and then come over to the screens, and I could do, where to go, custom, and then there's that new component I just did. And it doesn't do anything obviously, but that's how it would work. So you're basically building a control of controls is what it boils down to.
I have another question, if
Sure.
you don't mind.
Yeah.
I hope I don't ask something that you're going to explain anyway, but is that rather a dynamic feature? So can you build dynamic graphical user interfaces? Like if someone types in, I don't know, Apple, show them a picture of an apple tree. If it types in, I don't know, the cucumber, show them a picture of a cucumber, so that you use one element with different appearances depending on the user interaction.
Yeah, so in that case, you would, well, it sounds like you'd have to use a little bit of artificial intelligence. So you could call out to the, and this is something I haven't worked on too much here, but let's see.
It's not about the AI features, just that you can use some if-else functionalities on the graphical user interface.
Yes, you can. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I don't think I have an example of if going on here, but yes. Here, I can even. So someone said a complex one. I do connect to AD here, so you'll see that's what's running here real quick is when I run this, I'm just going to go ahead and run it first, and then back off. I'm logged in as this Kenneth Gray. So this data was pulled from a Active Directory, and you can see here I have a couple of variables, and then here I'm showing you, I'm going to show you the code here. So it's not pretty, but this is what's going on in the background. This comes from a collection. These come from variables. And then over here, you see I pulled in all the various security groups that Kenneth belongs to. Okay. So let's go in and click on start. So this is your main code. Here's what I want to show is here I'm going out and I'm saying, hey, I'm going to grab the user who's signed in. I'm going to grab their username. I'm going to put it into this variable, and then their email. I'm going to put it in this variable. And then I'm going to go down here. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do it slightly different. Instead of doing it into global variables, I'm going to do it into a collection. So you can see the slightly different type of syntax here. I have my variable name, and then I have sort of a subclass or object, if you will, in older parlance. So I'd have name email dot name email dot email would give me the same information that these two give you. Okay, and then down here I go out and I say, okay, now I'm going to do grab a collection. In this case, I'm doing a clear collect. Clear collect just means that I'm going to create this. I'm going to go out and get a bunch of data and put it into a collection, which is like an in-memory table. But before I actually do the collect, I'm going to make sure that if there's already a table running or existing with this name, I'm going to flush it out. So I'm going to call it all groups. I'm going to go ahead and add some columns. In this particular place, I'm grabbing all the group names and display names for my security groups. So I figured out who I am, and then I'm going to go ahead and get the security groups for that person, and I'm going to display it here and here. So this is a gallery, and you'll see that the data source is all groups. So you can grab your gallery information from AD directly. In this case, I went and prepped AD and put it into an existing collection, and I called all groups, and I went ahead and clicked on that. You'll see the collections over here. So here's my AD, and here's my 2 collections. So when you wanted to create a new collection, you just go ahead and use connect to it, and usually you have to sign in, whatever it happens to be. If you go out to say you're going to connect to Salesforce, it would prompt you to sign in with a user ID and password for that connection, and then you'd be able to start accessing it. What it'll do is, because it's a REST API, it'll be able to start leveraging the fact that it knows what the results are, so you can start leveraging directly. You don't have to memorize things too much. So what I did here on these fields specifically, oops, let me go to advanced. So I created these fields, nothing fancy here. I went in and showed that it's connecting to the username field, right? So we saw that in the onStart, where I created a variable called username. I created one called email, and then down here I decided to use the collection version just for the sake of showing a difference. So again, here I'm just showing the username right off the bat. Here I'm showing the collection version, and I'm concatenating it all together. On the up, and then I have a few different buttons to show off some different features. This one, I come in, and I'm going to change all the variables from the Kenneth, and I'm going to change them to myself. And I'm even going to add just a random one here, and then I'm going to update the user group. Now, since Lee Zuckett is not in this user group, what's going to happen is when I do update, these will update to my name, but the user group should disappear because I'm not in this AD, because I'm logged into a little dev environment that Lee's not in, but Kenneth is. So if I go ahead and run it and do an update, you'll see that everything changed here and it updated here. Now, one of the key points I want to point out is that I never called anywhere did I say, go refresh the gallery. So in normal code, you'd have to go in, oops, click on that. Go in here, change my name, and then say, hey, gallery.refresh or something along those lines. Because in PowerApps is more like Excel, these scenarios are automatically refreshed and calculated for you. So there's no real explicit having to call back out. So to me, that was a big difference. Maybe to everyone else, it's pretty. It'll flow with you really neatly. But the moment you change a variable, whatever's connected to that variable, the event almost connected will auto fire. Okay. Then I have the clear button here. So here I just come in, I do a clear collect and change the collection. So let's go ahead and run that. I'm going to do, actually, step back. One funky thing here is if you want to refresh from start, you actually have to do an onStart call explicitly. I'm going to update to Lee. I'm going to clear it. And then I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to show off where you can see the collections that I've been creating. Now remember, when I hit that clear button, maybe I moved too fast. When I hit that clear button, I did a clear collect on this collection. I wiped out the Kenneth name, the Lee name, and I then added XYZ at Microsoft.com. I'll go through that code again real quick. And you'll see that this is empty because there's no groups for that particular person. Again, because they don't exist inside the Active Directory. I'll jump through this one more time. And then I can also jump in while I'm here. I can jump in and see the variables I have set. So I did a clear collect. So that flushed out my collection, but I didn't go back and change the explicit variables that I had defined. Okay, so they're still there. You still see they're the ones that Lee, because when I hit the update, they changed it from Kenneth to Lee. Then I hit clear, but these still remain the same. So let me go through that process again. OnStart, get everything back to normal. Click Start. I'm going to update it. Now I'm going to go. Notice how I can jump in and out of the application, and it's not like I have to start from scratch, right? I can jump right to where I want to be. And which is why when you want to start from scratch, you have to like manually do an on start. You basically have to tell the system, no, I truly want to start from the very beginning, not just at the spot I last paused on. So that's another little difference that maybe takes a while to get used to, is that you're not starting from scratch in an application every time you press run. Now you'll see that we had the collection of Kenneth and the ABC, because I hit one of the buttons that added ABC, but Kenneth was the one I initially came into. And the security group was flushed out in that case. Let me go through that one more time. On start. And then collections. You'll see the collection, and you'll see his data group. Because I clicked on start, and what on start does is it goes out, preps, gets my logged in information, which is Kenneth, and then goes and gets his security information and puts it in the all groups. If I go and click update, it'll switch it to Lee. It's gonna lose the security group. So there you have, oops. Yeah, so there you have your all groups is empty, because it tried to go out, do a refresh on the security groups for Lee as opposed to Kenneth. There is no Lee, so the collection is empty.
So
I
have a more general question.
Sure.
Do we have the possibility to have backups, or does the application automatically save and we can restore them, or how does it function?
Yeah. So you go back here. Let me tweak something here, just because So you can come in here and you can save, and you'll see that I have various versions saved. So this is saving it up to the cloud, but you can also go back and say, oops, I really messed that up. You can see all versions, and you can see here I've been playing with this particular one for a while. And you can jump back as you want to go. You can see any specific details, any connections, flows, etc. Let's see, where is it? There's also, give me a second here. Darn it, where did it? Oh, save as. So you can also do save as, where save to the cloud. Okay, that's what I just did under save. You can do it here again. You can also save it local. This is a way that if you're working with someone and you don't really want to share the app with them because you want them to install it in their own environment, you can save it to your computer. It saves it as a XY, whatever the file name is, .msapp, which is really just a zip file. If you rename it to abc.zip, you can open it as a zip file, and you can actually see all the XML and JSON files that are behind the scenes.
Very interesting.
Yeah. That's a way you can bebop it around. So I know, I didn't go through the normal, hey, let's just create an app and walk through it, because I figured you've either already seen that or you can watch a lot of YouTube videos along those lines. I really was hoping to show off just some different nuances here about how it works, and I don't know. Hopefully, it came across as well. Trying to focus on ideas of what is the OnStart and why you'd want to do concurrent. So this one's pretty straightforward. Nothing is fancy here. But if you were going out to say another database to get my name and then get my email, say you're going out to SAP, this is where the concurrent you might want to use it, because each of those calls could be expensive, and by expensive I mean time consuming. And if I did them one at a time and each one takes a second, that adds up. The average user, from a user experience, starts to get irritated after about half a second. So you can run out of that really fast, right? So if you can reduce 10 seconds startup time to 5 or 4 or something like that, people would be very, very grateful for that scenario. That's one reason why the splash screen pops up, and a lot of times they change. People are always wondering, why is it when a splash screen comes up, it tells me what it's doing? Because it almost resets that part of your brain that sits there and that tells you you're waiting, because you see something's happening, and it lets you know that it's not frozen and you're not just dilly-dallying. Something's happening. So little bit collection stuff, you really are going to want to focus on the collection. Collections are very big in PowerApps. So that's something you'll want to look into. And again, remember, it's really just boils down to just an in-memory table. You give it a name, and then you'll be able to create the fields. They're pretty straightforward. You can see here, I didn't have to go in there and say this is a text or a string. It's going to understand all that automatically for you, which is good and bad. It's good. It lets you get in there and get things done very quickly. Bad in so much that if you've ever worked with high-level languages, a lot of times you start bumping into, is this really a number, or is this a string, or when is it a number, when's this, here in the US we have social security numbers, there are tax numbers. They're not really numbers. They all look like a number, but they're not. They're just a unique identifier for me, and they should be stored as a string, not as a number. So little things like that can sometimes be something you have to consider and keep an eye on. One thing I want to point out with concurrent, I have this here in the comment. I have a typo here. So you'll notice that I used user.email right here. And the question is, why didn't you just use this guy or even, this guy or even this guy? Okay. Well, the reason I didn't is that I'm still inside the concurrent. And you cannot assume when you're inside this concurrent, you'll see the concurrent begins here and it ends, I think here. I think that's the end of the concurrent. When you're inside that, you cannot assume that any of these are running in a specific order. So my clear collect may be running before this was set. It's unlikely in this case, but you can't assume it, and the application won't let you assume it. So if I went down and changed it to do this, it'll probably complain, or should complain. There you go. So because again, I don't know for sure that when this guy runs, this guy may not have run yet, may not be done running yet. So you can't assume that. So I had to go and do it explicitly. Okay, just little things like that I was hoping to be able to show off, and that might be a little different than what you see in your normal scenarios. I also wanted to, show off, this is just a reset, so nothing fancy there. Noted that you can use concurrent other than just in the onStart. So I'm really harping on this concurrent because it's something that a lot of folks, when you're calling out to a lot of areas, you will want to use. It's not just for onStart. It just happens to be the place that most people will use it initially. Yeah. Let's see. Was there anything else I wanted to show off before? Is there? I guess we'll just switch over to any questions. I have maybe 5 more minutes, and then. So I know someone wanted to see a more complicated one. Again, I was trying to show just some different nuances. This is my 3rd time saying this, and not just hey, how do I connect to SAP or Salesforce? Because you'll be able to see that elsewhere. I was hoping to show off the little funky little areas that you may stumble across and not understand why it's happening the way it's happening, because PowerApps is a little different than your classical design environment. So any questions?
I guess there's a question in the chat, so would you be willing to make the recording available to others?
Yes, we will try to have it in YouTube. I think there's currently also this live stream, and you can just find it. I will copy the link.
Okay, well, if there's any other technical questions, you probably have my address, or you can go through the team here if you have anything you want to ask in the background. I'll do what I can to answer any questions. But okay, I guess we're good to go. And I appreciate your time, and hopefully you were able to learn something out of this session. And again, let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Lee, for this interesting and insightful event. And thanks for being here.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye.
See you. Goodbye.